Okay, this is going to be a short video that discusses running Python from the CLI, which stands for Command Line Interface. So a Unix prompt, a Mac OS terminal prompt, which is really a Unix prompt, or from the command program in Windows. So there's a couple things we want to talk about. The first is doing this on your local machine. So either Python was already installed, or in a previous homework assignment you installed it, and we need to know how to go about running this at the command line as opposed to idle, which we have done before. So first thing you're going to need to do is to create your program using an editor. And for this video example, the next few slides is going to talk about some Python code that we're going to use and run from the command line interface. So this is what it looks like, or begins with. At the top, when I do programming classes, I like my students to have what I refer to as a standard header. And that standard header is going to have your name, the name of the program that we're working on, what course it is for, and the due date. And then after that, a short explanation of what the program is trying to accomplish or do. So all that we've talked about to this point is just comments. So information for you or me or somebody else looking at your program. So what happens is, one thing I stress is having a nice looking, well spaced out program, and then your output as well should be kind of spaced out and easy to read. So what I like to do is start my program with just a print with no arguments. And basically what that's going to do is that's going to give us a blank line. So you have your command prompt, you type your command to run Python, and then it's going to print a blank line. The next section of code, I have a comment telling what I'm doing, which is I'm getting the values of X and Y from the user. So these two lines of code are very similar to code that appeared in your textbook. The innermost function is the input function, which is going to prompt the user with please input a value for X, and it's going to read that value, and then it's going to cast it or convert it to an integer with the int function, and then store that in X. Likewise, it's going to do the same thing for Y. Related to spacing things out, if I did not put that space after the colon, it's going to print out that prompt, and then where the user is typing input is going to be right there next to the colon. So it's nice to put a little space there so it looks a little better when the user runs it. And then as far as the rest of the program, after the user does input, I'm going to generate a blank line with that print statement at the top. And then I am going to use a print statement that basically uses an F string. It looks up the value of X. So whatever the user inputted for X, it'll put that. It'll put a plus sign. It'll put whatever value the user put for Y. It will then put an equal sign, and then it will perform the calculation X plus Y. And it will output all that on one line to the user. Then I have another print with no arguments to give me another blank line. Then I do basically the same type of thing, except instead of doing addition, I'm doing multiplication on the two values that the user inputted. And then I put a print so that I get a blank line before I get the Unix prompt back. So again, just so it looks a little nicer. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to record a session of me running the program we just talked about from the Unix command line on my local machine. Okay, here I am at the Unix prompt of terminal on my Mac OS machine. So the only thing that I have right there now is the prompt, which is my machine name, my current directory, which is tilde, which is my home directory, and the account I am logged into, which is my Wayne account. Now, the example that we just discussed, I have a copy of that on this machine. I know we haven't really talked about a lot of Unix commands yet, but one of them is the ls command for listing files, and I'm going to use the wildcard asterisk and then .py. So what this will do is it will show me all the files in my current directory that end in .py, which are presumably Python files. So when I do that, I have a couple of things that I've worked on that happen to be in this directory. But the very first one there, example.py, is the program that we talked about earlier. So the way I show the contents of that file is with the cat command. So I'm going to display that, and you will see that this is the exact same code that I had discussed with you previously. Now then, I know that on my machine the command to execute the Python interpreter is Python 3. So I'm going to say Python 3 and then the name of the file that contains my Python program. So in this case, example.py. What this is going to do is it's going to take the program and start interpreting and executing it. So I hit return, and the very first thing is that input statement that says input a value for x. So I'm going to type 10 in and hit return, and then it's going to ask me to input a value for y. I'm going to input 20, and it's going to tell me 10 plus 20 equals 30, 10 times 20 equals 200, and then it's going to give me the prompt back. Now, one thing I will stress when you're actually writing programs in class is that you have an appropriate number of test cases to show that your program is working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to execute this program again, and this time I'm going to put slightly larger values of x and y in. So I'll set x to 100, y to 300, and then it's going to perform the calculations, and the sum of those two numbers is 400, and the product is 30,000. So you should also look at those and make sure they kind of make sense and that you don't have a logic error in your program. And then what I'll do is I'll execute it one more time, and maybe I want to see how Python does math with negative numbers, make sure it supports that and does it correct. So for x, I'm going to put in -5, and for y, I'm going to put 4. And -5 plus 4 is -1, and -5 times 4 is -20. So my program does what I wanted to set out to do, which is get two numbers from the user, tell me the sum of those two numbers, and tell me the product of those two numbers. Okay, what I just did was running the program on my local machine. There's another way we can do this. There's actually a Unix server that Bluegrass Community and Technical College provides to us. It used to be called the district server, but several years ago they rebuilt it and converted it from a physical machine to a virtual machine and named it Grace after Grace Hopper. Some information about this, I've already said it is a virtual machine. That virtual machine is allocated 16 gigabytes of RAM. As far as storage, there is 1 terabyte of storage for user data. Each user has access to 500 megabytes of storage. So if you hit your quota, it is going to not allow you to store any additional data until you delete some things. But 500 megabytes is actually quite a bit. And it runs Linux, in particular Ubuntu Linux. Several things you need to know, and the first is to log into this machine, you have to be on KCTCS's VPN, their virtual private network. One of your homeworks coming up will have you download, install, and use the VPN to allow you to connect to the Grace server. On the server, you will need to know some basic Unix commands, so you can do mostly file management, but so you can move around the file system and that type of thing. I will have a future video that has 10 or 15 Unix commands that is enough to get you started interacting with a Unix machine, in case you're not familiar with Unix or Linux. When you go to create your program, you will need to use an editor on that machine, which will be either VI or Nano. I will give you a future video that talks about these. And then once you're on there, you will execute the command. So as we'll see in the video that I will put right after this, there is a Python command on the server, and there is a Python 3 command. It's a very common setup. If you use just Python, you'll find out that you get Python 2. Python 2 should no longer be used. If you issue the command Python 3, then you're going to get a version of Python 3, which is what we'll be using for this course. So the program I discussed at the first of this video, just like I ran it on the local machine, I'm now going to show you some things about the Grace server and execute the exact same code on the Grace server. Okay, here I am back at a terminal session on my local machine, and I'm going to show you how to run the program we've been discussing on the Grace server. One of the things I mentioned is the very first thing you're going to have to do is install a VPN. That will be covered in a future homework, but I already have the VPN installed. And you'll see up here at the top this icon right here that kind of looks like a shield. If I hover over it, is Forta Client version 7. This is the VPN. So on my Mac, to start it, I click on this icon, and I've already set it up to have my credentials and information on the VPN server for KCTCS. So I'm going to click on that. Notice over here I have another icon. This is my network icon, and it's going to animate, and it said it was connecting, and then it connected, and now it's counting time. The other thing I can do is I can go back to this client, which is now changed to have a lock on it to show that it's a secure connection. If I click on that icon again, I have a disconnect button now. So that's a couple of ways to verify that yes, I am connected to the server. Now what I need to do is I need to actually log in. So there's a couple of ways to do this. You can use an application called PuTTY, which you can download for lots of different operating systems, or you can go to a command line on a Unix machine and use Secure Shell. And then what you have to do is you have to give your KCTCS ID, and then the name of the server, which is grace.bluegrass python.kctcs.edu. And when I do that, it's going to connect to the server and ask me for my password. So I'm typing my password in, hitting return, and this is the login banner that welcomes me to the Grace server, tells the last time I logged in, and gave me the prompt. Now then, on this server, I organize things so that I have folders for each of the classes. So this class is CIT 144. So I'm going to CD down into my 144 directory. I'm going to do an ls. I don't have a lot in here at this point. Right now I just have the example.py program that we have already looked at a couple times. If I want to look at the contents, I simply cat out the example.py file, and you will see that, lo and behold, this is the exact same program I ran on my local machine. Now then, one of the first things we have to do is to figure out what Python command we need to use. So typically what I'm going to start with is just saying Python. It would be nice if the command was Python. So I say, is there a Python command? If so, show me the version. And I get Python 2.7, which is an old version of Python, and like I've mentioned, is going away. And we really need to be using Python 3. So I'll type in Python 3 to see if it exists, and if so, give me the version. And yes, Python 3.6.9 is installed on the machine. This is a slightly older version of Python. I may contact the sysadmin and ask them, if we can get 3.11 or something a little newer. But for what we're doing, at least at this point in the semester, 3.6 should be more than adequate. So just like we did on my local machine, I can type in Python 3 and the name of the program, example.py, hit return, and I'll do the same values I did before. I did x equals 10, y equals 20, and it gives me the same results. We would expect that. Just to kind of run my program through the paces, I'm going to do it again, and I've used 100 and 300 the second time, and I get 430,000 as the results, just like I did before. And I will run it one last time to enter -5 and 4, and then I get the results that I expected. Now, since this is all I need to do on the machine right now, I'm going to log out of the machine, which I do. I can type exit, or the easiest way is to do a Control-D. And when I do a Control-D, it notifies me that my connection to the Grace server has been closed and gives me the Unix prompt back on my machine. And then I'm going to go back here, click on the Forta client icon, and disconnect my VPN. Okay, so that finishes up the lecture on running Python programs from a command line interface.